This 6-year-old beggar girl kicks a millionaire and runs away, but she trips and he does this to her in a fury. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The July rain lashed the streets of Chicago with cruel intensity, turning the sidewalks into small rivers and making pedestrians run for cover. Among the people sheltering under awnings and bus stops, a small figure drew attention by the way. She remained exposed to the downpour, as if the cold water running down her thin face was just another hardship she had learned to endure. Isabella "Izzy" Silver, only 6 years old, was sitting on the doorstep of a closed store downtown, her brown hair plastered to her face by the rain, her soaked clothes revealing a visibly malnourished body. Her small, dirty hands held a plastic cup with a few coins that tinkled faintly with each drop that fell into it. For 3 months, ever since her grandma Clem had a stroke that left her hospitalized and then unable to care for her, the little girl had turned the streets into her home. On that particularly cold morning, Izzy watched people rush by, her stomach rumbling loudly with hunger. She hadn't gotten a single coin since the day before, and the cold was starting to turn her lips purple. That's when she saw an elegant man approaching, talking on his cell phone while holding a steaming coffee in a disposable cup. Arthur Art Thompson, 45 years old, was known in Chicago as a successful businessman. Owner of a thriving custom furniture factory, he always dressed in expensive suits and maintained a confident posture that reflected his professional success. At that moment, he was discussing details of an important contract on the phone, completely absorbed in the conversation that could bring millions to his company. "I won't accept less than 15% margin," he said firmly on the phone, without noticing a wet child approaching timidly. "That's non-negotiable." Izzy got up from the doorstep with trembling legs, holding her cup of coins. The rain had made the ground slippery, and her torn sneakers offered no grip. She took a few hesitant steps towards the elegant man, hoping he might have compassion for a hungry child. "Please, mister," she murmured in a weak voice, extending the cup towards him. Arthur, still focused on the call, didn't see her approach. He kept walking while gesturing with his free hand, explaining contract terms to the client on the other end of the line. That's when the inevitable happened. Izzy, trying to reach him, slipped on the wet sidewalk. Her small body collided with Arthur with enough force to make him lose his balance, and the hot coffee he was holding flew towards his designer white shirt, staining it completely. "What the hell?" exclaimed Arthur, abruptly interrupting the call. He looked down and saw a dirty, wet child at his feet, her eyes wide with terror. "You ruined my shirt! This cost more than many people make in a month!" Izzy, overcome by panic and the survival instinct she had developed on the streets, did the only thing her terrified mind could process. She kicked Arthur in the shin with all the strength her little body allowed and ran away. "Get back here, you brat!" he shouted, more out of reflex than a real intention to chase her. But Izzy couldn't get far. Her bare feet and the drenched sidewalk conspired against her. After only a few feet, she slipped again and fell hard, scraping her knee on the rough concrete. A cry of pain escaped her throat as she tried to get up, but her left leg wasn't responding properly. Arthur, who had started following her more out of impulse than real anger, stopped when he saw the child lying on the ground, crying in pain. Something in his chest clenched unexpectedly. The anger he felt for the ruined shirt was instantly replaced by a feeling he couldn't name. He approached the girl slowly, noticing for the first time her deplorable condition. The torn and dirty clothes, the too thin arms, the bare and hurt feet. When she looked up at him, perhaps expecting another shout or threat, Arthur saw something that made his world stop for a moment. Izzy's eyes weren't just those of a scared child. They were the eyes of someone who had lost all hope, who had learned to expect only pain and rejection from adults. They were eyes he knew well, for he had seen the same ones in the mirror during the darkest years of his life. "Hey," he said softly, crouching down beside her. "You're hurt." Izzy flinched, preparing for more yelling or maybe an assault. But to her surprise, the man's voice was gentle, almost careful. "I'm not going to hurt you," Arthur continued, watching the blood running from her knee. "But that cut needs to be cleaned. Do you have anywhere to go? Where are your parents?" The question filled Izzy's eyes with fresh tears. She shook her head negatively, unable to speak. Arthur looked around. The rain continued to fall, and people passed by without stopping, too hurried or too indifferent to care about the scene. He knew he couldn't leave a hurt and clearly abandoned child there in the rain. "What's your name?" he asked. "Izzy," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "Izzy," he repeated as if testing the name. "My name is Arthur. I'm going to take you to get that hurt looked at, okay?" Before she could answer, he gently lifted her into his arms. Izzy stiffened initially, but she was too weak to resist, and something in the careful way he held her made her relax slightly. As he walked towards his car, carrying the child, Arthur had no idea that his life was about to change completely. He didn't know that this little girl would bring up secrets that he and his wife had buried deeply, nor that the next few months would be an emotional roller coaster that would test all the limits of his sanity. What he knew at that moment was just that he couldn't abandon a hurt child in the rain, and that simple decision would be the first step towards a journey that would reveal devastating truths about his own family. Arthur's private medical clinic was just a 10-minute drive from downtown. Throughout the journey, Izzy remained silent in the back seat, watching the luxurious interior of the vehicle with wide eyes. She'd never been inside such a clean and fragrant car, with soft leather seats and air conditioning that slowly dried her soaked clothes. Dr. Mike Harris, the Thompson family's trusted physician for over 15 years, greeted Arthur with surprise when he saw him arrive carrying a visibly malnourished child. "Arthur, what happened?" asked the doctor, observing Izzy's condition with professional concern. "She got hurt on the street," Arthur explained, avoiding going into details about the incident. "She needs medical attention, and—" He hesitated, looking at the girl. "I don't think she has anyone." Dr. Harris led Izzy to an examination room, where he began to assess not only the wound on her knee, but her overall health. What he discovered was alarming. "This child is severely malnourished," he murmured to Arthur as he cleaned the cut. "From the signs I see, she hasn't had a proper diet for months. Furthermore, she has anemia and signs of vitamin deficiency." Arthur watched silently as the doctor cared for Izzy with professional gentleness. The girl remained quiet, but her eyes followed every movement as if she was always prepared to run. "She will need follow-up," continued Dr. Harris. "Blood tests, controlled nutritional supplementation. It's not something that can be solved in a day." "And where should she stay during this treatment?" Arthur asked, already knowing that the answer would put him in a complicated situation. Dr. Harris stared at him seriously. "Ideally with a family that can provide adequate care. Otherwise, we would have to contact social services, but—" "But?" Arthur insisted. "Being honest, Arthur, you know the situation of the shelters in the city. This child needs specialized attention, not just a place to sleep." During the consultation, Izzy didn't say a word beyond her name. When Dr. Harris asked about her family, she only shook her head and whispered, "Grandma Clem," without being able to explain anything else. Arthur made a decision that he himself couldn't fully explain. "She can stay with me temporarily, until we find a better solution." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure? And Valerie?" "I'll take care of it," Arthur replied. More to himself than to the doctor, the trip back home was even quieter. Arthur bought new clothes for Izzy at a store along the way, watching how fascinated she was with clean and beautiful pieces of clothing. It was as if she had never seen anything like it. The Thompson mansion was located in an upscale neighborhood of Chicago with manicured gardens and an imposing facade that intimidated visitors. When Arthur parked in the garage, Izzy looked out the window with a mixture of admiration and fear. "Is this where you live?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. "Yes, it is," he replied, "and you're going to stay here for a while until we're okay." Valerie Thompson was in the living room when she heard the car arriving. At 38 years old, she maintained an impeccable appearance that reflected her social status, but her eyes revealed a deep sadness that not even the most expensive makeup could hide. The 10 years of failed attempts to get pregnant had left invisible marks on her soul. When Arthur walked through the door holding the hand of an unknown child, Valerie felt as if the world was turning upside down. "Arthur, who is this girl?" she asked, her voice tense. "Valerie, I need to explain a situation," he began, using the careful tone he reserved for difficult conversations. "This is Izzy. She's the daughter of a factory worker who had a serious accident. She needs to stay with us for a few weeks until her mother recovers." It was a lie, and Arthur knew it. But he couldn't find a way to explain the truth without sounding completely irrational. Valerie studied Izzy from head to toe, noticing the 2 new clothes and the way the child hid behind Arthur. Something in the situation didn't make sense, but she was too tired to question it at that moment. "Which worker?" she asked, her curiosity overcoming exhaustion. "Sandra from the finishing department," Arthur improvised. "She doesn't have family here in the city, and social services are overwhelmed." Valerie watched Izzy once more. The girl was pretty, with large, expressive eyes that reminded. She shook her head, pushing away dangerous thoughts. "Where will she sleep?" asked Valerie, resigned. "In the guest room," replied Arthur. "It's temporary, Valerie, just until we resolve the situation." On that first night, Izzy took the first hot bath in months. Valerie, despite her initial reluctance, helped prepare the bathtub and chose appropriate sleepwear. When she saw the child clean and properly dressed, she felt a strange pang in her chest. "Are you hungry?" Valerie asked, watching as Izzy devoured the kitchen with her eyes. Izzy only nodded, still too distrustful to talk much. Valerie prepared a simple plate of rice with chicken, watching with fascination and horror as the child ate as if she wasn't sure when her next meal would be. Each bite was taken in a hurry, as if someone was going to take the food away from her at any moment. "Slow down," Valerie murmured gently. "No one is going to take your food." That night, after Izzy fell asleep in the guest room, Arthur and Valerie had a tense conversation in the kitchen. "There's something you're not telling me," said Valerie, her eyes fixed on her husband. "What do you mean?" "That child, Arthur. She doesn't look like a worker's daughter. She looks abandoned." Arthur sighed, running his hands through his hair. "She was on the street, Valerie. Alone, hurt, hungry. I couldn't just leave her there. And you made up this story about the worker because I knew you wouldn't accept the truth," he admitted. Valerie was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "And now? What do we do with her?" "We take care of her," Arthur replied with a determination that surprised him, "at least until we find her real family." But neither Arthur nor Valerie could imagine how Izzy's presence would reveal secrets that both had buried deeply, nor that Valerie herself was about to make decisions that would put the child's life in mortal danger. On that first night, while Izzy finally slept in a soft, safe bed, Valerie stayed awake late, watching the child sleep through the ajar door. Something within her was awakening, something she had tried to suppress for years. And it was something that would soon become dangerous for everyone in the house. The following 2 weeks transformed the Thompson mansion in an unexpected way. Izzy, who initially hid in corners and whispered monosyllabic answers, began to show signs of the joyful child she had once been. Her timid laughter echoed through the hallways, a sound the house hadn't heard in years. Arthur found himself eagerly awaiting the moments when he arrived home from work and found Izzy in the garden, playing with the flowers or watching the birds. There was something in her innocence that touched a part of his soul that he thought was lost forever. "Uncle Arthur," she called him now, "did you know that butterflies like yellow flowers?" He would sit in the garden with her, temporarily forgetting the pressures of work, the important meetings, and the million-dollar contracts. For the first time in 15 years, since he lost his baby son, Arthur felt genuine joy. Valerie watched this transformation with conflicting feelings. On one hand, she saw her husband happier than he had been in years. On the other hand, she felt a growing unease that she couldn't explain. Her depression medication, which she had been taking secretly for months, no longer seemed to be working. The nights became periods of torturous insomnia. "She looks like him," Valerie murmured one night, watching Izzy sleep. "Like who?" Arthur asked, although he knew exactly who she was referring to. "Like Pete. The way she curls up her little legs when she sleeps, the way she smiles." Arthur felt a pang in his chest. Pete had been their son, who was born prematurely and lived only 3 days, 15 years ago. The loss had almost destroyed their marriage, and they had never spoken openly about it again. "Valerie, she's not him," Arthur said gently. "I know," she replied, but her eyes said otherwise. During these 2 weeks, Valerie began to develop an obsessive routine around Izzy. She woke up before everyone to prepare the girl's breakfast, chose her clothes with excessive care, and watched her sleep for hours. What Arthur didn't know was that Valerie had stopped taking her antidepressant medication against medical advice. In her confused mind, she believed that the drugs were preventing her from feeling the maternal love she had finally found. "Mommy Valerie," Izzy called her. One day, without realizing the devastating impact those words would have, Valerie froze, tears springing instantly from her eyes. "What did you say, my love? Can I call you Mommy Valerie? You take care of me like a mommy." At that moment, something fundamental broke in Valerie's mind. The barrier between reality and fantasy began to disintegrate. "Of course, my love," she whispered, hugging Izzy with an intensity that scared the child. "Of course you can." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Grandma Clem Silver was fighting her own battle. At 62 years old, she was still recovering from the stroke that had left her hospitalized for months. Her blood pressure was finally under control, and the doctors had discharged her, but her mind was consumed by a single worry: finding her granddaughter. "Where's Izzy?" she asked the social workers repeatedly. "Doesn't anyone know where she is?" "Mrs. Silver, we're doing everything we can," replied the social worker, Patricia Santos. "But the girl has simply disappeared. We have no leads." Grandma Clem knew that Izzy had been on the streets during her hospitalization. Guilt consumed her day and night. How could she have left her granddaughter helpless? How didn't she foresee that her health might fail? Determined, she began to walk the streets of Chicago daily, questioning shopkeepers, homeless people, anyone who might have seen a 6-year-old girl alone. Her feet ached, her heart was weak, but she didn't give up. "A little girl, brown hair, very thin," she described tirelessly. "She's my only family." Back at the Thompson mansion, Arthur began to notice subtle changes in Valerie's behavior. She was more careful with Izzy, almost possessive. Strange comments escaped her lips. "She needs a haircut," Valerie would say, watching Izzy play. "The way I used to cut Pete's." "Valerie, Pete was a baby. He didn't have hair to cut." "But he would have," she replied with a disturbing certainty, "if he had lived." Arthur tried to talk to Dr. Harris about the situation without mentioning Valerie's strange behavior. "How's the follow-up with the girl going?" asked the doctor during a casual encounter. "She's recovering well," Arthur replied. "Gaining weight, happier." "And the family situation? Have they contacted the mother?" Arthur hesitated. The lie he had told was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "We're still sorting out the details." Dr. Harris watched him curiously. "Arthur, if you need help regulating the legal situation, I can recommend good lawyers specializing in adoption." The word adoption echoed in Arthur's mind for days. Was that what was happening? Was he becoming so attached to Izzy that he was considering keeping her permanently? One afternoon, while Arthur was at work, Grandma Clem finally got a lead. A furniture factory worker, Robert Smith, who had known the family since before Clem's stroke, recognized her on the street. "Mrs. Silver, how are you? And little Izzy?" "Robert, my dear, don't you know? Izzy's been lost for 3 months. I was hospitalized, and when I got out, she had disappeared." Robert was shocked. "But Mrs. Silver, I saw a child who looked a lot like Izzy. It was about 2 weeks ago. She was with the boss, Mr. Arthur Thompson." Grandma Clem's heart almost stopped. "Are you sure? How did she look?" "She seemed well cared for, with new clothes. I thought she was a relative of the boss." Clemencia got Arthur's address through Robert, and that same afternoon took 2 buses to get to the upscale neighborhood where he lived. Her hands trembled when she rang the doorbell of the mansion. Valerie opened the door, finding an elderly lady, visibly nervous and tired. "Can I help you?" asked Valerie, not recognizing her. "I'm looking for my granddaughter," said Grandma Clem, her voice choked. "Izzy Silver. A worker at your husband's company said he saw her here." Valerie's blood ran cold. This woman was real. Izzy had family. Someone had come to get her. "I'm sorry," Valerie lied, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know any child with that name." "But Robert said—" "Robert must be confused," Valerie interrupted. "There's no child living here." Grandma Clem tried to look inside the house, but Valerie blocked her view. "Are you sure? She's 6 years. Old brown hair." "I'm sure," Valerie said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy." And she closed the door in the face of the devastated old woman. At that moment, Izzy was in the attic, playing with toys that Valerie had bought for her. She didn't hear the conversation at the door. She didn't know that her beloved grandmother had finally found her. Valerie leaned against the closed door, her heart beating uncontrollably. She couldn't lose Izzy, not now that she had finally found the maternal happiness she had always wanted. It was then that she made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't let anyone take her daughter away, no matter what she had to do. The morning after Clemencia's visit, Valerie woke up with a cold determination that she hadn't felt in years. She watched Izzy sleeping peacefully and whispered, "No one will take you away from me, my love. Mommy will take care of everything." Arthur had traveled to New York on business, a 3-day trip that he had planned for weeks. Before leaving, he kissed Izzy's forehead and said, "Be good with Aunt Valerie, okay? When I get back, we'll go to the park." "Promise, Uncle Arthur?" asked Izzy, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "I promise," he replied, without imagining that it would be the last time he would see her for months. As soon as Arthur's car disappeared around the corner, Valerie put her plan into action. She took Izzy to the attic of the house, a large but dark space, used mainly to store old furniture and decoration boxes. "Let's play hide and seek," said Valerie with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're going to hide up here, and I'm going to pretend I don't know where you are." Izzy, trusting in the woman she had called Mommy, excitedly climbed the stairs. The attic smelled of mildew and dust, but it had some small windows that let in some light. "It's a very good hiding place," said Valerie, organizing a small space with mattresses and blankets between the boxes. "But remember, it's very important that you stay very quiet. If you make noise, the game is over and bad things might happen to Grandma Clem." The name of her grandmother made Izzy freeze. "Do you know my grandma?" "Yes, I know her," lied Valerie, "and she's fine, but only if you're an obedient girl and stay quiet here." Valerie locked the attic door from the outside, leaving only a small opening at the bottom of the door to pass food and water. When Arthur called that night to find out how everything was going, she replied with a frightening naturalness, "Everything's quiet here. Izzy is sleeping." "And how did she behave today?" asked Arthur. "Like an angel," replied Valerie, looking towards the ceiling. "A perfect child." Meanwhile, Grandma Clem hadn't given up. Valerie's refusal to admit knowing Izzy had only increased her suspicions. During the following days, she returned to the Thompson house twice, always receiving the same answer. There was no child there. "I know she's there," Grandma Clem murmured to herself, watching the mansion from afar. "I can feel it." In the attic, Izzy began to understand that this was no longer a game. Valerie appeared twice a day with food, always cold leftovers, and water. The toys she had taken upstairs were her only companions. "When can I come down, Mommy Valerie?" she asked whenever the woman appeared. "When Uncle Arthur comes back from his trip," replied Valerie, "but only if you behave properly." The nights were the worst. Alone in the dark, Izzy heard strange noises from the house and felt scared. She started wetting the bed, something that hadn't happened in years, and cried softly so as not to displease Valerie. When Arthur returned from the trip, he found the house strangely silent. "Where's Izzy?" he asked, looking for the girl in the usual places. "She went home," replied Valerie calmly, continuing to fold clothes as if nothing had happened. "What? Do you mean she went home? Home to who?" "Her mother got better and came to get her. Sandra, remember? The worker who had the accident." Arthur felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "When? Why didn't you call me?" "It was yesterday. It happened so fast. The woman showed up with the documents, said she was fine and took the girl. But didn't she say goodbye? Didn't she leave a message?" Valerie avoided his eyes. "You know how kids are." She was eager to see her mom again. Arthur spent the rest of the night restless. Something in Valerie's story didn't make sense, but he couldn't identify exactly what. The next morning, he went straight to the factory to question Sandra about her supposed daughter. "Sandra," he called the worker from the finishing department, "how's your daughter? I heard she's been sick." Sandra looked at him confused. "What daughter, Mr. Thompson? I don't have any children." Arthur's blood ran cold. "But didn't you have an accident? A little daughter who needed to stay temporarily?" "Mr. Thompson, I've never had children," repeated Sandra, now worried. "Are you feeling okay?" Arthur went home with his heart pounding. He confronted Valerie in the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. "Valerie, Sandra doesn't have any children." Valerie's hands stopped in the middle of slicing onions. "Of course she does. I talked to her today. She's never had children, never had an accident. Where's Izzy? I already told you, she went home with her mother." "What mother?" exploded Arthur. "Izzy doesn't have a mother. She was abandoned on the streets when I found her." Valerie turned slowly to face him, and Arthur saw something in her eyes that terrified him. It was an empty look, disconnected from reality. "Yes, she does have a mother," said Valerie with a disturbing calm. "I'm her mother now." "Valerie, where's Izzy?" "Safe," she replied, "where no one can take her away from me again." That night, Arthur heard something that made his blood run cold. It was a very low sound, almost imperceptible, coming from upstairs. It sounded like a child crying. He followed the sound up the stairs, stopping in front of the attic door. He put his ear to the wood and heard clearly. It was Izzy crying softly. With his heart pounding, he tried to open the door, but it was locked. Izzy, he called softly. The crying stopped immediately. Izzy, it's me, Uncle Arthur. Are you there? A weak and scared voice replied, Uncle Arthur. Mummy Valerie said, You went away forever. Arthur felt tears spring to his eyes. We would never leave without saying goodbye to you, honey. Listen, where's the key to this door? I don't know, whispered Izzy. Mummy Valerie keeps it. At that moment, Arthur heard footsteps coming up the stairs behind him. He turned around and found Valerie standing at the top of the stairs, holding a cup of tea and looking at him with that empty and disturbing expression. She needs to learn to be quiet, Valerie said simply. Otherwise, they'll try to take her away from me again. Valerie, open this door right now. I can't do that, Arthur, she replied, as if explaining something obvious to a child. If I open it, she'll leave, and I can't lose another child. It was at that moment that Arthur realized the real extent of the problem. His wife had completely lost touch with reality, and Izzy was in mortal danger. The 3 months that followed were the most torturous of Arthur's life. Valerie had become a relentless guardian of her secret, controlling his every move and keeping Izzy locked in the attic, as if she were a precious object that needed to be protected from the world. Arthur tried everything. He looked for the attic keys, but Valerie always kept them with her. He tried to break down the door when she was out, but the attic had been renovated years ago with a solid wood door that resisted all his attempts. He considered calling the police, but Valerie always reminded him that no one would believe him. You yourself lied about her being an employee's daughter, Valerie would say, with a disturbing lucidity in the moments when they argued. Who's going to believe that you didn't know where she was? They'll think you're an accomplice. The situation became even more complex when Arthur discovered that Valerie had completely stopped taking her antidepressant medication. He found the pills hidden in various places of the house, inside vases, behind books, at the bottom of drawers. Valerie, you need to start taking the medicine again, he pleaded one night. I don't need medicine, she replied, methodically combing her hair in front of the mirror. Now that I have my daughter, I'm cured. Dr. Ed Carter, Valerie's psychiatrist, confirmed Arthur's worst fears when he managed to get a private consultation. Arthur, when a patient with a history of depression abruptly stops medication, they can develop psychotic episodes, explained the doctor. The loss of contact with reality can become progressive. And what can I do? She needs to be hospitalized for evaluation and medication stabilization. But that can only be done with her consent or through a court order proving imminent risk. Meanwhile, in the attic, Izzy lived a silent nightmare. She had completely stopped talking during Valerie's visits, which became increasingly strange and disturbing. My beautiful girl, Valerie whispered, sitting next to the child on the dirty mattress. Mommy brought your favorite food. The food was always the same. Cold leftovers from whatever meal had been prepared in the house. Izzy had lost weight again. Her eyes were sunken and dull, and she developed the habit of rocking back and forth when she was alone. The nights were populated by nightmares. Izzy dreamed of her grandma Clem, of the happy days when they played in the small backyard, of the loving smile that always greeted her when she arrived home from school. She woke up crying softly, remembering Valerie's recommendation not to make noise. If you cry too loud, Valerie had said weeks before, bad things will happen to Grandma Clem. You don't want her to get hurt, do you? The constant threat to her grandmother kept Izzy in a state of permanent terror. She didn't know that Grandma Clem continued to look for her tirelessly. The elderly woman had turned into an obsessive investigator. Every day she walked through different neighborhoods of Chicago, talked to shopkeepers, visited places where lost children might appear. Her health deteriorated rapidly due to stress and physical exertion, but she refused to give up. My granddaughter is alive, she told anyone who would listen. I can feel it in my heart." On one of these wanderings, Grandma Clem found Robert, the factory worker who had mentioned seeing Izzy with Arthur. This time, she pressed him for more details. "Robert, my dear, are you absolutely sure that it was my Izzy who was with your boss?" "Mrs. Silver, I've known the girl since she was little. It was her, yes, I'm sure." "And how did she look?" "Well cared for, with new clothes. But—" Robert hesitated. "But what?" "She seemed kind of scared. She didn't smile when she saw me. And whenever I saw her before, she was a happy child." This information further fueled Clem's suspicions. That night she returned to the Thompson mansion, but this time she didn't ring the doorbell. She watched the house from afar, looking for signs of a child. That's when she noticed something strange. A faint light appeared and disappeared in a small window at the top of the house, as if someone was moving around with a flashlight, and for a few seconds she was sure she saw the outline of a small face in the window. "Izzy," she whispered, tears running down her wrinkled face. Back in the house, Arthur was living his own hell. Valerie had become increasingly paranoid and controlling. She checked his phone calls, followed him when he went out, and had even installed extra locks on the doors of the house. "People are trying to get in," she would say, checking the locks obsessively. "People who want to take our daughter." "What people, Valerie?" "The old woman. She comes back here almost every night looking at the house. She wants to steal Izzy." Arthur realized that Valerie was referring to someone real, probably Izzy's real family. His guilt and despair increased. An innocent child was paying the price for his wife's mental illness and his own inability to take drastic measures. One night, after 3 months of torture, Arthur had a desperate idea. He waited for Valerie to fall asleep and tried to talk to Izzy through the attic door. "Izzy," he whispered, "do you remember Grandma Clem?" There was a long silence before the weak reply. "Yes, I remember. She's looking for you every day. She hasn't given up on finding you." "Is that true?" Izzy's voice sounded a little stronger. "It's true, and I'm going to get you out of here, I promise. But I need you to be brave for a little longer." "Uncle Arthur," her voice trembled, "I'm very scared." "I know, sweetie. I'm scared too, but we're going to get through this together." The next day, Arthur made a decision that would change everything. He called Dr. Harris and made an urgent appointment, deciding to tell the whole truth, regardless of the consequences. "Mike, I need your help. It's about Izzy, the girl I brought to your clinic months ago." "Arthur, how is she? I thought she had gone home." "She never left, Mike, and she's in danger." That same afternoon, while reporting the entire situation to the doctor, Arthur didn't know that Grandma Clem had finally decided to act on her own. Tired of waiting for answers from the authorities, she was preparing to break into the Thompson mansion during the early hours of the morning. Their fate was about to meet in a devastating way, and the truth that would be revealed would shock everyone involved in ways that no one could imagine. Friday morning would be marked by a convergence of events that would forever change the lives of all those involved. Grandma Clem had spent the night in vigil, watching the Thompson mansion from afar, waiting for the right moment to act. Her 62 years weighed on every joint, but the determination to find Izzy was stronger than any physical pain. At 3 in the morning, when the lights of the house finally went out, she quietly approached the side gate. Years of caring. For Izzy had taught her to be creative, and she knew that old locks could be opened with a bobby pin, a technique she had learned during a difficult childhood. Meanwhile, inside the house, Arthur couldn't sleep. The conversation with Dr. Harris had given him hope, but also urgency. The doctor had agreed to help, promising to talk to specialists about the best way to intervene in the situation without putting Izzy in more danger. That's when he heard a subtle noise coming from the garden. He got up silently and looked out the window, distinguishing a small, curved figure moving among the plants. His first instinct was to wake Valerie, but something made him hesitate. He went down the stairs carefully and opened the front door at the exact moment when Grandma Clem reached the porch. The two stared at each other for seconds that seemed eternal. "Are you Arthur Thompson?" asked Grandma Clem, her voice trembling with nervousness and hope. "I am," he replied, immediately realizing who this woman was. "And you are Izzy's grandmother." "Where's my granddaughter?" she asked directly, tears already springing from her tired eyes. Arthur looked back, checking that Valerie hadn't woken up, then signaled for Clem to come in. "Ma'am, there's a lot to explain. But first, I want you to know that Izzy is alive." Clemencia's legs almost failed with relief. "Where is she? Can I see her?" "It's not that simple," said Arthur, guiding her to the living room. "My wife, she's sick, very sick, and she keeps Izzy locked up." "What do you mean, locked up?" Before Arthur could answer, an icy voice cut through the air. "Who is this woman in my house?" Valerie was at the top of the stairs, wearing a white robe, her disheveled hair giving her a ghostly appearance, her eyes fixed on Clemencia with a disturbing intensity. "Valerie," said Arthur carefully, "this is Clem, Izzy's real grandmother." "Lies," replied Valerie, slowly descending the stairs. "Izzy doesn't have a grandmother. She only has me." Clemencia stood up, confronting Valerie with a courage that surprised everyone. "I raised that girl since she was born. Where is she?" "She's safe," said Valerie, positioning herself between Clem and the stairs, away from people who want to hurt her. "I would never hurt my granddaughter," exclaimed Clemencia. "I love her more than my own life." "Everyone says that," replied Valerie with a frightening calm. "But then they leave. They leave the children alone like you did." The accusation hit Clemencia like a slap. "I was sick. I almost died. If I could have avoided—" At that moment, a weak but audible sound came from above. "Grandma? Is that you, Grandma?" Clemencia's heart almost exploded with emotion. "Izzy! My girl! It's Grandma, yes!" Valerie panicked, running towards the stairs to prevent anyone from approaching the attic. "No, you can't take her away from me. She's my daughter now." "Valerie, stop!" shouted Arthur, holding her by the arms. "You need help. This isn't real." "It is real," she shouted back, struggling. "She calls me Mommy. She loves me. I won't let you destroy my family again." Clemencia, determined, passed by them and ran up the stairs, following the cries of Grandma that came from upstairs. She found the attic door and began to beat on it desperately. "Izzy, my girl, Grandma's here. Grandma, get me out of here. Please!" Izzy's voice was filled with despair and relief. Arthur reached the top of the stairs carrying Valerie, who had fainted from so much fighting. "The keys are in the pocket of her robe," he told Clemencia. With trembling hands, Clemencia found the keys and opened the attic door. What she saw made her cry instantly. Izzy was skeletal, dirty, with deep dark circles under her eyes and clothes that seemed not to have been washed for weeks. "My girl!" whispered Clemencia, running to hug her. Izzy threw herself into her grandmother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I thought I'd never see you again. I thought you had died." "Never, my dear, never. Grandma looked for you every day." Arthur watched the scene with tears in his eyes, carrying the unconscious Valerie. "We need to take her to the hospital," he said about his wife. "And Izzy also needs medical attention." Dr. Harris was called and arrived quickly, bringing with him Dr. Carter, the psychiatrist. Izzy was examined and, although malnourished and traumatized, she was physically stable. Valerie was hospitalized for urgent psychiatric evaluation. During the exams, a devastating revelation emerged when Dr. Carter spoke with Valerie in her moments of lucidity. "Arthur," said the psychiatrist hours later, "Valerie told me something you need to know. She did get pregnant 15 years ago." "That's impossible," replied Arthur. "Pete was born prematurely. I was present at the birth." "Pete wasn't the only baby," continued Dr. Carter. "According to her, they were twins. One was born first and survived for 3 days. That was Pete. The other, a girl, she lost during childbirth. Valerie never told you this because she blamed herself for the loss. Arthur was in shock. A daughter, she never told me. The guilt and untreated grief evolved into a severe depression that, with the interruption of medication, turned into psychosis. In her confused mind, Izzy represented the daughter she lost 15 years ago. In the months that followed, Izzy gradually recovered under the loving care of Clemencia, who moved to a larger house with Arthur's financial help. He established an educational fund for the girl and paid for psychological therapy for both to overcome the trauma. Valerie spent 6 months hospitalized, receiving intensive treatment. When she was finally discharged, she asked to see Izzy one last time. The meeting took place in the presence of Clemencia and the psychologists. "Izzy," said Valerie, her hands trembling, "I want to apologize. I was very sick and I did terrible things to you." Izzy, who had returned to talking after months of therapy, looked at the woman who had kept her imprisoned. "Aunt Valerie, you were confused, but you hurt me a lot." "I know," replied Valerie, crying, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to forgive myself for that." A year later, Izzy was attending school, playing again like a normal child, although she still had occasional nightmares. Clemencia, strengthened by the love of her granddaughter, had fully recovered her health. Arthur, divorced but at peace, maintained a relationship of affection and respect with both. Every Sunday they had lunch together, and he had become a father figure to Izzy, who called him Uncle Arthur of the Heart. "Grandma," said Izzy one afternoon while playing in the backyard, "why do people sometimes get so sad that they do bad things?" Clemencia reflected carefully before answering. "My dear, sometimes sadness hurts people's hearts so much that they get confused. But the important thing is that there's always hope, there's always love to heal those wounds." "Like love healed us?" asked Izzy. "Exactly like love healed us," replied Clemencia, hugging her granddaughter. At that moment, watching Izzy laugh and play freely, everyone knew that, despite all the suffering, love had won, and that sometimes, even in the darkest situations, hope finds a way to blossom again.